Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to feel peaceful, the more restless your mind becomes? The more you try to stop overthinking, the louder your thoughts get. The more you chase happiness, the more distant it feels. Most people spend their entire lives fighting their own minds without realizing that the fight itself is the reason they suffer. The Stoics understood something powerful centuries ago. Peace does not come from controlling everything around you. It comes from understanding yourself. The moment you stop forcing life to match your expectations, your mind slowly begins to calm down. And once you truly understand this, your entire way of living changes forever. Every moment in life appears exactly as it is. Reality does not bend to your wishes. Your thoughts do not obey commands. Your emotions do not disappear simply because you want them to. Yet most people live as though life should always move according to their desires. When things go wrong, they become frustrated. When discomfort appears, they panic. When emotions rise, they try to push them away. But the harder they resist, the stronger those feelings become. This is one of the deepest paradoxes of human life. The mind cannot be forced into peace. The Stoics believed that suffering is not caused by events themselves, but by the judgments we place upon them. Two people can face the same problem and experience it completely differently. One person collapses under pressure while another remains calm and steady. The event is the same. The difference lies in perception. This is where true freedom begins. The moment you realize that your reactions shape your experience more than external events ever could, you gain power over your life. Most people spend years chasing things they believe will finally complete them. They believe happiness exists somewhere outside themselves. They think more money, more recognition, more success, or more validation will finally make them feel enough. But every time they achieve one goal, another desire immediately appears. Satisfaction never lasts for long. The mind quickly creates another target, another expectation, another thing to chase. And slowly, life becomes an endless cycle of striving without peace. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said that it is not the person who has too little who is poor, but the person who always wants more. Desire can quietly become a prison. The more your happiness depends on external outcomes, the more fragile your peace becomes. Every delay feels painful. Every rejection feels personal. Every failure feels like proof that something is missing inside you. Over time, the mind becomes trapped in constant tension because it believes fulfillment is always somewhere else. Think about how often your mind tells you that your current life is not enough. It says you need to achieve more before you can relax. It says you need more success before you can feel confident. It says you need other people's approval before you can feel worthy. And because of these beliefs, the present moment never feels complete. Your attention is always focused on what is missing rather than what already exists. This is why so many people remain anxious even after achieving what they once desperately wanted. They reach the goal, but peace still feels far away. The mind simply moves the finish line again. One success becomes ordinary, and another desire takes its place. Without realizing it, people spend their entire lives postponing contentment. Marcus Aurelius understood this deeply. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." These words contain one of the most important lessons of Stoicism. Real peace does not come from controlling the external world. It comes from mastering your relationship with your own mind. The problem is that most people try to control things that are not fully within their power. They try to control outcomes. They try to control other people's opinions. They try to control every emotion that arises inside them. And when those things refuse to obey, frustration grows stronger. But the Stoics taught that the only things truly under your control are your judgments, your choices, and your responses. This changes everything. Instead of fighting reality, you begin observing it. Instead of resisting every uncomfortable feeling, you learn to allow it to exist without panic. Instead of demanding certainty from life, you learn to move forward despite uncertainty. And strangely, the moment you stop desperately trying to control everything, your mind becomes calmer. The human mind behaves in fascinating ways. The more you try not to think about something, the more attention it receives. The more you resist fear, the stronger it feels. The more you push away sadness, the heavier it becomes. This happens because resistance gives energy to the very thing you are trying to avoid. Imagine trying to hold a ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more forcefully it tries to rise back up. Your emotions work in a similar way. When you constantly fight your thoughts and feelings, you unintentionally strengthen them. What could have passed naturally becomes trapped in your awareness because you keep struggling against it. This is why many people become exhausted by their own minds. They are not only experiencing discomfort, they are also fighting the discomfort every moment. One part of the mind feels pain while another part says, "This should not be happening." That inner conflict creates even more suffering. Epictetus explained this perfectly when he said, "Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them." The discomfort itself is often not the real problem. The resistance to discomfort creates the deeper suffering. Think about anxiety, for example. Many people fear anxiety itself more than the situation causing it. The moment anxious feelings appear, they panic. They begin asking themselves, "Why am I feeling this? How do I stop it? What if it never goes away?" And because they resist the feeling so intensely, the anxiety grows stronger. Their attention remains locked onto it. But something remarkable happens when you stop treating every uncomfortable feeling like an emergency. The moment you allow an emotion to exist without fighting it, its grip often weakens. The feeling may still remain for a while, but it no longer controls your entire awareness. This does not mean becoming passive or emotionless. Stoicism is not about suppressing human feelings. It is about changing your relationship with them. Instead of reacting automatically, you begin observing calmly. You stop adding unnecessary judgment to every experience. At first, this feels unnatural. Most people are conditioned to immediately fix, escape, or resist discomfort. Sitting quietly with difficult emotions can feel uncomfortable in a completely different way, but over time you begin to notice something important. Emotions naturally rise and fall when they are not constantly fed by resistance. A wave appears in the ocean, rises for a moment, and eventually fades. Thoughts and feelings behave similarly. They move through the mind naturally when you stop desperately trying to control them. But when you cling to them or fight them, they remain active far longer than necessary. This understanding creates a different kind of inner stability. Your peace no longer depends on always feeling good. It no longer depends on perfect circumstances. Instead, your stability comes from knowing that you can face discomfort without collapsing beneath it. That is true strength. Not the absence of difficulty, but the ability to remain grounded while difficulty exists. The Stoics believed that life becomes lighter when you stop demanding that every experience feel pleasant. Pain, uncertainty, failure, embarrassment, rejection, these are natural parts of being human. The problem begins when you believe these experiences should never happen. Once you stop labeling every uncomfortable moment as something terrible, life changes in subtle but powerful ways. Challenges become easier to face. Failure becomes less personal. Emotions lose some of their intensity. You begin responding with clarity instead of panic. And this shift affects every part of life. Relationships improve because you stop needing constant validation from others. Conversations become more genuine because you are no longer performing for approval. Work becomes less stressful because your entire sense of self-worth is no longer attached to success or failure. Even small moments begin to feel richer because your mind is not constantly chasing the next achievement. Most people never fully experience the present moment because their attention is always trapped in comparison, expectation, or desire. They are physically present, but mentally somewhere else, thinking about what they need next, thinking about what they lack, thinking about what could go wrong. The Stoics encouraged a different approach. They believe that peace emerges when attention returns to what is actually happening right now, not the imagined future, not the regrets of the past, but this moment. This does not mean abandoning ambition or refusing to improve your life. The Stoics were not against action. They simply understood that action becomes healthier when it is no longer driven by desperation. You can still pursue goals while remaining emotionally free from them. That is an important distinction. A person attached to outcomes believes their happiness depends entirely on success. A Stoic focuses on effort, character, and wisdom instead. They act with discipline and purpose, but they understand that many outcomes remain outside their control. This mindset creates enormous freedom. You stop wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable. You focus instead on your actions, your decisions, and your mindset. And because of this, even difficult situations become easier to navigate. There is also a quiet confidence that develops through this way of thinking. When your worth is no longer dependent on achievements or approval, you stop feeling constantly threatened by life. Criticism loses some of its power. Failure becomes information instead of humiliation. Uncertainty becomes manageable instead of terrifying. Over time, your entire relationship with life begins to shift. You stop seeing challenges as proof that something is wrong with you. You stop treating every emotional experience like a crisis. You stop chasing perfection. And gradually, the heavy tension that once followed you everywhere begins to loosen. This transformation is not dramatic or instant. It happens slowly, through awareness, through observation, through repeatedly choosing understanding over reaction. The Stoics knew that peace is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is something practiced daily. A way of relating to thoughts, emotions, and events with clarity instead of chaos. And perhaps the most surprising part is this. The moment you stop desperately chasing happiness, you often begin to experience it naturally. Because happiness was never hiding in future achievements or perfect circumstances. It was hidden beneath the constant resistance, craving, and fear that kept your mind trapped. Once those layers begin to fall away, something quieter appears underneath. A sense of steadiness, a sense of clarity, a sense of freedom. And for the first time in a long time, life no longer feels like a battle against yourself. There comes a quiet moment in life when you finally realize that peace cannot be forced. No matter how hard you try, happiness refuses to appear on command. Calmness cannot be created through pressure. The harder you chase inner peace, the further away it often feels. This is because the mind works differently from the external world. In the outer world, effort usually produces results. If you work harder, you often achieve more. If you practice a skill, you improve. But the inner world follows different rules. Thoughts, emotions, and peace cannot be controlled through force. In fact, the more aggressively you try to control your mind, the more disturbed it often becomes. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that suffering does not come only from difficult events. Much of human suffering comes from the constant effort to control what cannot fully be controlled. People become exhausted because they are carrying invisible weight every single day. The weight of expectations. The weight of needing everything to go according to plan. The weight of trying to feel perfect all the time. But imagine what happens when that weight slowly begins to disappear. Life still continues. You still wake up each morning. You still work, solve problems, face challenges, and pursue goals. But something inside changes. The pressure lessens. The desperate need for certainty weakens. You no longer approach every moment as if your entire happiness depends on the outcome. And strangely, that is when life begins to feel lighter. The experience is very similar to falling asleep. Nobody falls asleep by forcing it. The harder you try to sleep, the more awake you become. Sleep happens naturally when the mind relaxes and stops struggling. Peace works the same way. Happiness emerges when the constant pressure to capture it finally fades. Yet most people spend their entire lives doing the opposite. They treat peace like a trophy they must win. They believe happiness is hidden somewhere in the future, waiting behind another achievement, another relationship, another success. And because of this belief, they remain trapped in endless striving. There is a deep irony in this. The tighter you hold on to happiness, the more it slips away. The more desperately you chase fulfillment, the more incomplete you feel. This happens because the mind becomes obsessed with what it lacks instead of recognizing what already exists. Carl Jung once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." That idea reflects an important truth. You are not controlled by every emotion, every thought, or every uncomfortable experience. You always have the ability to choose your response. The moment you stop trying to manipulate every feeling, awareness begins to grow. Instead of forcing experiences away, you observe them calmly. And through observation, clarity appears. When tension fades, your entire perception of life begins to change. Small moments suddenly become more vivid. Things you once ignored now feel meaningful. The sound of rain, the warmth of sunlight entering a room, the rhythm of your breathing, the calmness of silence. These simple experiences were always there, but your mind was too distracted by striving to notice them. Most people are mentally absent from their own lives. They are always measuring, comparing, judging, and planning. Their minds constantly ask questions like, "Am I successful enough? Am I falling behind? What if I fail? What if I never become enough?" These thoughts create a constant inner noise that disconnects people from the present moment. But when the pressure to constantly evaluate yourself begins to fade, something beautiful happens. Life feels more direct, more real, more alive. You stop seeing every moment as a test you must pass. Instead, you begin experiencing life without unnecessary resistance. This shift also changes the way you make decisions. When your mind is no longer dominated by fear of failure or desperate attachment to outcomes, thinking becomes clearer. Actions become more deliberate. Creativity increases because your attention is no longer trapped in anxiety. The Stoics believed that wisdom comes from focusing on what is within your control and releasing attachment to what is not. That principle sounds simple, but practicing it changes everything. You begin understanding that you cannot control every event, every opinion, or every result. But you can control your effort. You can control your character. You can control how you respond to difficulties. And that realization creates resilience. Challenges still exist, but they stop feeling like personal attacks against your worth. Obstacles become situations to navigate, rather than proof that something is wrong with you. Failure becomes feedback instead of humiliation. This way of thinking transforms relationships too. When your happiness no longer depends on validation from others, conversations become more authentic. You stop trying so hard to impress people. You stop measuring your value through approval. Interactions become calmer because you are no longer constantly defending your identity. Without the pressure of comparison, genuine connection becomes possible. Even productivity improves when you let go of compulsive striving. Many people think pressure creates performance, but constant anxiety often weakens focus. When actions are no longer fueled by fear, the mind operates with more precision and clarity. You begin working because the work itself matters, not because your entire self-worth depends on the result. This creates a different kind of energy. Calm, but powerful. Focused, but flexible. There is an important distinction here. Letting go does not mean giving up. Stoicism is not about becoming passive or indifferent. It is about removing unnecessary psychological suffering from action. You still pursue goals. You still improve yourself. You still move forward in life. But your inner peace no longer depends entirely on whether external circumstances obey your desires. That freedom changes the quality of experience itself. Most people have developed deep mental habits without realizing it. From childhood, they were taught that effort guarantees rewards. In many areas of life, that idea is useful. But internally, it creates problems. People assume they must constantly fight their minds in order to become peaceful. The Stoics recognized that this approach only creates more struggle. When you constantly resist discomfort, you strengthen it. When you constantly judge yourself, you create tension. When you constantly compare your life to imagined ideals, you generate dissatisfaction. Over time, these patterns become automatic. The mind develops a habit of feeling incomplete. That is why awareness is so important. The moment you begin observing your own patterns, the cycle slowly weakens. You start noticing how often your mind creates unnecessary suffering through judgment and expectation. You notice how many thoughts are based on fear, comparison, or imagined inadequacy. And once you see the pattern clearly, you stop blindly obeying it. This is where real transformation begins. The Stoics taught that freedom is not the absence of difficulty. Freedom is the absence of unnecessary internal struggle. That idea is incredibly powerful. Pain may still appear. Fear may still arise. Difficult moments will still happen. But your relationship with those experiences changes completely. Instead of becoming trapped inside them, you observe them with greater calmness. Emotions begin to rise and fall naturally because you stop feeding them with resistance. Anxiety loses some of its intensity because you stop treating it like an emergency. Sadness becomes easier to carry because you stop believing it should never exist. Uncertainty becomes manageable because you stop demanding absolute control over life. Little by little, the mind becomes steadier. And perhaps the most important part of this journey is recognizing how much of your suffering came from rigid expectations. Most people unconsciously believe life must happen according to a personal script. They expect themselves to always feel motivated, confident, successful, and emotionally stable. And whenever reality differs from those expectations, frustration appears. But reality was never designed to obey mental scripts. Life contains uncertainty. It contains discomfort. It contains change. The Stoics accepted this instead of fighting against it, and through acceptance, they discovered peace. When expectations loosen, perception changes. Ordinary moments gain richness because your attention is no longer buried beneath constant mental pressure. A simple conversation feels more meaningful. A quiet walk feels calming. Even daily routines begin to feel lighter because the mind is no longer constantly asking whether every moment is productive enough or successful enough. Life stops feeling like a race you are losing. Instead, it becomes an experience you are actually living. This shift also changes your relationship with desire itself. Desire is not inherently bad. Wanting to grow, improve, and achieve meaningful goals is part of being human. The problem begins when desire turns into psychological dependence. When you believe your happiness depends entirely on achieving something external, suffering becomes inevitable. But when goals are pursued with awareness instead of desperation, life becomes balanced. You can work hard without destroying your peace. You can care deeply without becoming emotionally enslaved by outcomes. You can pursue success without losing yourself in the process. That is the balance Stoicism teaches. The more you release rigid expectations, the more freedom your mind experiences. Attention becomes clearer. Decisions become calmer. Reactions become more measured. Instead of constantly forcing life into a specific shape, you begin responding intelligently to whatever life brings. And strangely, that flexibility creates strength. Because real strength is not rigid control. Real strength is adaptability. The Stoics understood that peace cannot be found through endless chasing. It appears naturally when the noise of compulsion begins to fade. Happiness stops feeling distant because you stop postponing it behind future conditions. You begin realizing that much of what you were searching for externally was already available internally once the constant pressure disappeared. The quiet freedom you wanted was never hidden inside achievements alone. It was hidden beneath the endless mental struggle. And when that struggle weakens, life opens in a completely different way. Every breath feels steadier. Every moment feels clearer. Every experience feels more alive. Not because the world suddenly became perfect, but because your relationship with it changed. You stop trying to hold what cannot be controlled. You stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world. You stop fighting every uncomfortable emotion. And in that surrender, a deeper kind of strength appears. A strength built not on control, but on understanding. Not on force, but on awareness. not on endless striving, but on inner steadiness. This is the peace the Stoics pointed toward for centuries, a peace that cannot be bought, a peace that cannot be forced, a peace that quietly emerges the moment you stop running from yourself and finally learn to stand calmly within your own mind.